Are you looking for ideas to turn your 12 by 12 patterned paper into cards, but you don't need a pile of scraps? Hi, I'm Jess from JessCrafts.com, and I'm here to help you make the most of your crafty supplies and time. So let's get making. Today I have 12 by 12 paper busting template for A2 cards number 37, which means there are 36 previous ideas available on JessCrafts.com, and if you don't want to download those all one by one, I do have a pack of 40. So I have up to 40. We're only on number 37 at the moment, but 40 different ideas for turning 12 by 12 paper into A2 cards with no scraps. You can find that in the Etsy shop. So today we're going to be working with Holly Jolly holiday paper from Crate Paper. I'm going to use this piece here with the holly images and the flowers as my paper that will make the cards with no scraps. And then I also have this paper. They don't have names on them, but they have like product numbers. It's P10 and P12, it looks like. And this one has all kinds of little like tags. Normally I would try to cut these with my paper trimmer, but I'm noticing there's kind of not an easy way to start. There is no like straight line that I could cut all the way across back horizontally or vertically that won't cut through some of them. So I am going to have to use my scissors, but I thought this is a great way to save a little bit of money if you want some coordinating embellishments. A piece of patterned paper that you can cut apart might be like $1.50 and a pack of embellishments might be like $6. Those are just kind of rough prices at the time of recording. But you can see that if you want to put the work into cutting it out, you can save a couple of dollars and you can get a couple of sheets from the collection to go with your embellishments. I also like that these are pretty like general Christmas colors. I think they'll go with a bunch of different collections. There's a lot of black and white sayings that could be used with a variety of paper collections. And there are some to and from tags, which I ordinarily would not use on a card. I have some ideas for what else I could do with them, but even if those ideas don't work out, I would suggest that you could simply use those on your holiday packages instead. So let's get started following the cutting template. So there's a cutting template that tells you how to cut the patterned paper and a sketch showing you how to assemble all of those pieces. This 12 by 12 pattern paper has a branding strip. The other side of the branding strip does have the pattern on it. So what I would suggest to do with that, since it's not included in the 12 by 12 sketch, is to put it on the inside of the card as a little bit of decoration, or of course you can put it in the trash if it's not something that you want to use. But if you look at this sketch, this 5 1/4 plus this 3/4, this is all you need for one card. And so I basically am cutting my paper into 4 by 6 inch pieces, and you get 6 of those evenly out of a piece of 12 by 12 patterned paper. So that's how I'm gonna start. I'm going to cut these to 6 by 12 and then cut them down. And I'm noticing, maybe I cut the other one a little bit too generously, but we'll figure it out. Okay, so here's my 4 by 6 piece, or my 12 by 6 piece, and then I'm gonna cut it to 4 by 6. And each of these 4 by 6 pieces, I'm going to follow the template, and it says that I need a whole 4 by 3 1/4 inch piece off the bottom, so I need to cut that first. So I'll measure to, you can either measure 3/4 or you can measure to the other measurement, which is 5 1/4, by basically subtracting 3/4 from 6. And so now I have this 4 by 5 1/4 inch piece, and I'm going to cut 1 inch off of the side of it and leave 3 inches. And then the final cut is to die cut a circle out of the center. I think this is usually kind of a tricky thing to do with punches because they only have so much reach. I like to use a set of nesting dies. I have the Hero Arts Infinity dies. I was able to find them on a good sale, and I actually bought more than one set because I like to make multiples of cards. So I could even come in and cut several pieces of patterned paper at one time with the same size circle die. And I'm recommending about a 2 1/4 inch circle, and then putting the next layer of your die set on top of it. And I've just basically said, hey, about a 2 1/4 inch patterned paper and then a 2.5-inch mat around it, but you can play with those as you want. Just be sure that you're not cutting more than there is of the patterned paper, because you're going to fit this piece kind of back on top in the end. You're going to cover that hole with this circle. So I am going to have this pattern be my circle piece and my background piece here. And then these two strips that go down the paper or down the card and across the card, I am going to use the other side because I am using double-sided patterned paper, and it's going to be this more simple pattern like that. So I'll use that side. This should work. This does work with directional patterned paper, but neither one of my papers is particularly directional today, so you won't really notice that. I'm generally a pretty big fan of using red cardstock with Christmas things. However, I have found it's a little bit tricky to source in the way that I typically buy my cardstock. I usually buy 110-pound cardstock from Michael's or Michael's Recollections or Joanne Park Lane, but rarely do I find that in red, and I use it at like a disproportionate rate if I do. So I do sometimes buy red cardstock from more like smaller, like boutique type cardstock. So this is like Hero Arts, which is great cardstock. It's just that since I primarily use cardstock for mats, I don't typically invest in this more expensive cardstock. But I'm using that today, and so I tend to be a little bit more aware of how much I'm using and getting the most out of things. So one way to do that is to start with your scraps, which I will be using some scraps today. But I need 5.5 by 3.25-inch mats for this large piece here. So I can cut it to 5.5 by 8.5, and then I'm cutting it down to 6.5. And then cut that in half again to 3.25. I know I'm saying a lot of numbers here. All of the numbers are written right on the sketch for you. But the way that I'm trying to make sure I have a good effective use of the cardstock is cutting the cardstock mat that I need for the circle out of this mat as well, because when I put this mat down, you're not going to see the hole in the center. We're going to be covering the hole with the layers of the patterned paper in the end. So that is where I am taking that mat from. You can also say you don't need a circle mat, you're following a different sketch, but you are using more expensive cardstock, or even in this case where there's still like a little chunk down here. I would suggest going into your collection of dies and just picking a die you use a lot of, like maybe a quick banner die that is smaller. That one's probably a little too tight, but let's see what I got over here. So like I could cut an oval out of the bottom, and then that way, the next time that I want to reach for a sentiment die or something, I can get good use out of it. Then for the other, so I'll run that through my die cut machine. I'll repeat this process 6 times with both the patterned paper and the cardstock till I have everything I need for my 6 cards. But the other thing I need are some 1-inch mats, so 4.25 by 1 inch and 5.5 by 1.25. So here's where I'm going to go into my scraps, because I happen to just have a lot of these strip scraps, and so I thought that was another reason to go ahead with this cardstock, even though it's a little bit more on the expensive side, is I have a good amount of scraps that hopefully I can make use of today. So here's a 1 inch, and I need 1 by 4.25. That's super fortunate because that's 1 by 8.5, which means I can cut 2 of the mats that I need perfectly out of it. So that's for 2 cards. And what I also would like to do a lot of times with this is sort these into my scrapbook.com stack and sort tray. So that way I can keep all the ingredients essentially for 1 card. I don't know if ingredients is the best word there, but so I need this mat, I'm going to need this, so like whatever I'm trying to like put together for 1 card. As I cut things out, if I sort them, I'm much more likely to not accidentally cut more than I need. And similarly, I need a 1.25 inch by 5.5 inch mat. So I'm gonna see, I'll go through my scraps. I think these are all 1 inch, which is fine because I do need to use a bunch of 1 inch. So at least I got those out of the scraps, even if I get nothing else out of the scraps. I do have this scrap here, which is 2 by 5.5. And I would be able to cut the mat that I need. I only need 1 1/4, so I'll have, another scrap left over, but it's still better than cutting into a brand new sheet of paper. So I was going along and cutting my extra, and I was like, okay, I need these pieces that are 6 inches because I'm thinking 4 by 6 inches. And I cut my 4 by 12 inch piece, which absolutely needed to be cut to 4 by 6s, into 6 by 6s. And that's a problem because now my template perhaps doesn't work. So I'm gonna try to figure out how to fix it. And I thought I may as well just share that with you because I think that that's probably gonna happen to all of you at some point. And there's usually a way that it can be fixed. So I'm thinking, well, I know that I need to cut that 3/4 inch piece off the bottom. And the only way this is going to work is going to be that piece being cut in half on the final card. And I have some ways around that. I have I think already 2 ideas for what I will do to make that work. But the first thing I'm gonna do is I know that I wanted that piece anyway, to be out of this plaid side. So I'm lining up the patterned paper back together. Then I'm gonna take a piece of temporary tape because with this plaid, I really need it to be lined up well. It's going to be noticeable if it's not. And I'm gonna temporarily tape it back together. Then I'm gonna take some more tacky tape, regular transparent tape, and I'm going to tape the back side. Oh, I totally missed the mark on that. Oh boy. One of those days where you're just like, maybe I shouldn't be crafting right now. Okay, so I've taped that back together and I know that I need this 3/4 inch piece. I was also kind of concerned because there was this little bit of white left here, I didn't cut off the branding strip perfectly, but now it occurs to me that that doesn't actually matter because I'm not using this side where you can see the white bit. I'm using the side that had the continuous pattern anyway, so bonus way that I didn't mess up, at least there's that, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. So I'm gonna measure this whole thing. I'm gonna cut 3/4 of an inch off of it. So I lined it up to 5 1/4. And now I have this piece that I can cut into those 4 inch chunks that I need. So I will cut 4 inches off and then another 4 inches. And we have this paper here that technically has a seam in it. It's not terribly noticeable. I don't even know if you can see it right now. And I think the fact there's lines involved actually probably helps it to be less noticeable. And but I'll bend it in half so you can see. That's the broken piece. So I'm thinking I can put my sentiment right across there and that will distract from it, or I can switch the sketch. If you see, I have this strip along the bottom because my thought was I would put my sentiment on it, but I could put it underneath this strip. So instead of being on top of everything, I would just put it between the background panel and this first strip here. And then you wouldn't see the seam at all because it would be covered by any other piece of patterned paper. So that is how I have recovered the first bit. Then, now I have left is, and I put the tape a little too far, but that's okay, we can get that off. So now I need to figure out the other bit, how am I gonna make this work? Because I should be cutting a 4 inch piece down. If I need a 3 inch piece and a 1 inch piece. All these measurements are coming right from here, 3 inch, 1 inch. And I need three 3 inch pieces from all of this and 3 1 inch pieces. So if I start by cutting, these should be about 6 by 6. They look a little bit, oh wait, no. Cut off the 6 inch side. I'm telling you, it's gonna be one of those days. Okay, so I have the 6 inch side. I can cut it down to 3 inches and then I'll have the two of the 3 inch pieces I need. And then I make sure it's on the 6 inch side because there we go again. And then I have the third 3-inch piece, and now I need 3 1-inch pieces. So I can take this last 3-inch piece, cut it into those 3s. But I just had to like stop and think about the measurements for a moment so that I didn't just start, you know, chopping the paper again and make another mistake that I couldn't recover from. So now the only piece that is like, you know, messed up, that had to be taped back together, was one of those strips for the center, and we already have 2 different ideas for how to fix it. But I thought some of you would probably enjoy seeing how I recover from a mistake that in the moment I was like, oh no, like, am I gonna start this whole thing over again? No, I'm not. I'm gonna fix it. I mentioned earlier that I plan to cut out these tags with a scissor. And so primarily what I mean by that is I am going to cut along these lines and discard the scraps in between. But there are some instances, like with this postage stamp, where I don't think I'll try to cut into the little circle, so instead I'll leave like a border, so a little bit of this kind of a black color behind here, a black border around it. And then with some of the tags, if I think I'm going to be able to use it on a card, I'll actually, in as many instances as possible, try to cut this top off. I might bring a trimmer in for that since I don't have a line to follow, and just like, you know, chop the tag part off and just leave the candy canes, or like here with the Santa, just kind of cutting it straight across on the top and the bottom. And this is like one of those little projects that I think is great for, like, you can do it in on-the-go type situations, or just bring it around the house, or like do it while you're watching TV or something like that. So I'll probably just put like my scissor and my little, you know, paper bits in a zip top bag and just have that for, you know, getting that done elsewhere. Let's look at the assembly of the card now. So as mentioned earlier, I used, since it was like, you know, it's a little more expensive cardstock, I tried to cut some extra things out of it, including that mat that I needed. And then I'm gonna glue around these holes to make sure that I'm gonna get good, secure coverage. Usually I use a tape runner, and I probably will for certain things, but in this instance, I think the glue is a little bit more effective, although I did leak it out a little bit there on the side, because, you know, the tape has a certain width to it, and the glue, I can get a really fine bit of glue where I need it to be. And we'll attach this to the base of the card. Here I wouldn't so much mind coming in with the adhesive, the rolling adhesive, the tape, because all of this is going to be stuck down, whereas before, you know, a lot of this would be getting sticky in the back. It's not a big deal either way. Just sometimes certain things seem to call for certain adhesive, and so I usually do use like a combination of tape runner and glue as needed. They're both helpful things to have on hand in the craft room. So here, I'm noticing that when I have it up against the top edge, there's a little bit of extra room here on the bottom. That's somewhat normal. I think it might be actually just a little bit crooked, but if that happens, I usually just trim up whatever side is a little bit too long or something like that, because it's just, you know, there's some inconsistencies in paper size and that kind of thing, but for the most part, not a big deal. Then we have our 2 stripes of paper, and we're using the opposite side, the pink background with the red and green plaid, and we're gonna also do that same pattern for the strip across the center bottom. And so I put adhesive behind them, and then I can add that tape runner. But with these layers, we start to run into perhaps a little bit of trickiness. This is some thicker cardstock, and so when I place this down, and I want this to adhere, it'll adhere pretty well to the center here, because that's the next layer down, but it's not gonna stick to these bits. That might be okay. You might just put your adhesive down there and just be okay with it not sticking. But if you do want to give this like full support here, you're going to want to use like perhaps a bit of foam tape, but what I would recommend is this is a good place to use those cardstock scraps, especially those smaller pieces that you weren't able to use for cutting mats on previous projects. And so I usually will glue or tape 2 layers of cardstock together to give it a little bit of extra thickness. Depending on the thickness of your cardstock, you might even want more than 2 layers of that, but this will give it a little bit more area to stick to. when I place this circle down. And then similarly, we will do something in the bottom. Now I am trying to line this back up because so it looks like, you know, the place that I cut it out of originally, I'm putting it back in that place. So you can see those like bluish green leaves where the holly berries are. Similar to what we did under that circle, I'm actually going to add a little bit of extra cardstock to prop up the edges of this so that it sticks here in the center, but also to the edges with that little bit of extra support. Especially on this longer piece, I think it's a little bit more noticeable if it's not attaching to the sides, more likely to kind of flap up and create problems. So I like to prop that up there. And then that's the basic assembly of the card. Again here, this card is just a little bit longer. I'll just trim that edge up and make it look even. And we are going to do some embellishing of these. So I cut up that patterned paper with all the little like tags and sayings. And so I have a lot of these white sentiments, and these are like really easy to use on cards. I pulled out some that are really clearly sentiments to me, like season's greetings or happy holidays to you, but I also picked some that, well, maybe they're not like a super explicit sentiment, I think could work as a sentiment on the card, such as joy to the world, or deck the halls, or fa la la la. So whatever you want to use from those sentiments. But I wanted to talk about how I was going to use these tags that were included. I did not want to have to try to cut out the center of these tags. Instead, I'm just going to be cutting straight across these tags and turning them into square embellishments. Especially in this one, where there wasn't even a to from sentiment, that to me was a really clear way to get some good use out of this. So then I can just glue him down the center. Also, if you prefer, you don't like the squared up edge of this, the other thing I would consider doing is sort of fussy cutting them, but not cutting them exactly on the line, leaving that little bit of border around them. A couple reasons I like to leave that border. One, it's easier than cutting on the line. I can cut it way faster. Two, I think it helps it to stand out a bit more. I think it looks a little delicate when you cut it exactly on the edges, often, depending on the shape, of course, but in general, that's a reason. And then as I fussy cut it, I'm primarily moving the paper around and keeping the sharp part of my scissor, keeping the paper in the sharp part of my scissor there, not on the like very tip, which sometimes doesn't get you as clean of a cut. I think you get a little bit cleaner of a cut a little further down on the scissor. And so I can do that as a choice as well. I do understand this paper is maybe a little bit busy for a small embellishment like that, but I do think it works. It's just maybe not it wouldn't necessarily be everyone's preference. I also thought these postage stamps, which I did cut out, again with a border, but I cut it as a straight flat border. I think those would work well as embellishments. But finally, these that have an image and the to from. One of my ideas for how to use them, besides just straight up cutting the image off, kind of like I did with that Santa or fussy cutting the image out, what I would suggest doing is looking for some of the sentiments to cover parts of the word. Now, I can cover the to, I have from left. Of course, if you want to use these just as is and you want to put your recipient's name or anything like that, you absolutely can't. But what I'm thinking is if I cut off just the bottom from the from and then I cover the to, it gives me a little bit more weight to the embellishment than if I just cut it all the way small, and maybe it feels a little less wasteful of this embellishment paper. And these again, these little scraps, absolutely you could just toss them, but they also can be nice to layer inside the card. So we did have that like scrap of branding strip, so you know you can add these things together and add a little bit of interest in the bottom of the card if you want. But here I'd complete this by attaching the merry sentiment to the bottom, letting a little bit of that green stick out, and then it has a little bit more visual weight. In this instance, I would not put anything here because I'm going to consider this both the embellishment and the sentiment. One last quick tip I'd add for embellishing is if you're trying to see if you can squeeze out a couple cards that aren't like very explicitly Christmas, because maybe you would rather have like a happy holidays sentiment, you're not really sure how someone celebrates, like if a Santa image would be appropriate or something like that, I usually then try to go find those images first and pair them with my sentiments that are neutral first, so that I'm not at a point where I've started using my embellishments and I'm stuck with only Christmas images and neutral sentiments, or only neutral images and Christmas sentiments, just so that, when I've combined them to begin with. So here I have there's just a evergreen sort of leaf. I mean, it is holly, but I would pair that with my season's greetings rather than pairing season's greetings with the Santa, because clearly then it is a Christmas card. And now we have created 6 cards with 1 piece of 12 by 12 pattern paper and no scraps. Of course, I use that second pattern paper for our embellishments, and there will be scraps kind of like this or etc. With them, but hopefully you see how that can be a good value alternative. If you found this video helpful, here's another video where you can find more ideas for enjoying your crafty time and supplies. Let me know you like this video with a share to your crafty community. Subscribe and click the bell so you don't miss the next template tutorial, and check the video description for product links and a link to the template. See you in the next video.